Just before we get cracking with today's video, I do want to say there's obviously going to be a lot of Japanese pronunciation, and as always, I am doing my best. If you'd like to have a go at me anyway, do use the comments, that's what they're for. So, Hirohito, he was the longest reigning monarch in Japan's history, serving as emperor for 63 years. Vested with supreme power and viewed as a deity by his people, he presided over a nation that unleashed a war savagery that shocked the world. His unprecedented radio address to his nation, announcing Japanese surrender in World War II, startled the people, only to be followed with the bombshell that he was not in fact a god, but just a fallible man, just like the people. In this week's Biographics video, we go beyond the pomp and the ceremony to discover the man who was Emperor Hirohito. By the middle of the 19th century, the emperorship of Japan had become a title in name only. The emperor was merely a figurehead with no real say in matters of state. That changed with the ascension to the throne of the 122nd emperor, Meiji. Meiji embarked upon a series of political reforms that brought about an era of enlightened rule. By the time of his grandson, the future emperor Hirohito's birth, the cult of the emperor, it was already well established. Laws had been enacted forbidding any criticism of the emperor. The birth of Emperor Meiji's first grandson on April 29th, 1901 was a time of rejoicing throughout the empire. The infant was given the title Prince Michi. He was named Hirohito, which comes from a Chinese saying that roughly translates to when society is wealthy, the people are content. Hirohito's father was the 21-year-old Crown Prince Yoshihito. He was slightly built and he was constantly unwell. His mother was the 16-year-old Princess Sadako. As was the custom among Japanese royals, the child was taken from his parents and raised by a surrogate. It was decided by the emperor that his grandson be raised by a retired military officer in order to provide the mental toughness and discipline that would be needed for his future role as emperor. The man that was chosen was Count Kawamura Sumiyoshi, a retired vice admiral. The emperor told Kawamura to raise Hirohito as if he were his own grandson. Kawamura raised the infant at his mansion in the hills outside of Tokyo. When he was 14 months old, Hirohito was joined by his younger brother, Prince Yasuhito. Every aspect of the children's lives was carefully overseen, including the foods they ate and the clothes that they wore. But then, in November of 1904, Kawamura died, and suddenly the two boys were reunited with their parents at the Crown Prince's Ayayama Palace. The boys were now attended by a series of nurses. The main carer of Hirohito was a woman named Adachi Taka, who became his surrogate mother. Hirohito developed into a sedate, retiring, and insecure child. As would be expected, he was fussed over and pampered from the moment he woke each morning. This did nothing to develop resilience and independence. Even in play, he was to be shown the utmost reverence. When he and other children of the royal palace played war games, he was always to take the role of the conqueror general. From the age of 4 onwards, Hirohito and his brother were indoctrinated into the military heritage of their nation. They were often taken to military parades and war museums to gaze upon the swords of former heroes. Hirohito's worldview was built upon the belief that the entire past, present, and future of the great empire of Japan depended on the wisdom of the emperor and those few advisors that he surrounded himself with. At the age of 7, Hirohito's training was put in the hands of a hero of the Russo-Japanese War named General Nogi. Nogi insisted on strict military discipline, refusing to show any deference for the prince's position. Instruction centered on things that were considered essential in a future emperor: frugality, patience, diligence, self-control, and manliness. Nogi quickly made the young Hirohito come to the realization that he was physically weak and had to work hard to develop physical strength. His instructors at Pier's College were also told to give special attention to guiding him in military matters. By the age of 11, Hirohito had been imbued with a strong sense of reverence for his ancestors. It was at that age that he officially became a crown prince. He was also given the rank of second lieutenant in the army. A few months later, Emperor Meiji died at the age of 61, and Hirohito's father inherited the supreme position. In contrast to his own father, Yoshihito proved to be a weak and indecisive emperor. As a result, advisors came to have more and more sway in the royal court. Yoshihito did not involve himself in state affairs. His grandfather's death marked a turning point in the life of the future emperor. A new phase of his training it was undertaken with the appointment of a military aide-de-camp and a chamberlain. Between the ages of 13 and 19, he was given a military and liberal arts education at a school that had been especially built for him within the confines of the Takanawa Palace. He was instructed by the brightest military minds in the land. Hirohito graduated from the school in 1921. By this time, he had developed a fascination with biology. He liked nothing better than collecting seashells and small insects. During his school years, his teacher of natural history was a Professor Hattori. For the next 30 years, Hattori acted as his servant in all manner of scientific pursuits. In 1921, Hirohito visited Europe, making him the first Japanese crown prince to travel abroad. He was out of the country for 6 months, visiting the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Of this period, he later wrote, "I knew freedom for the first time in England." Every move that the young prince made while on tour was covered feverishly by the world's press. Having just returned from his overseas excursion, Hirohito was thrust further into the limelight when his father retired his office due to mental illness. The future emperor was now the regent. He was to retain this position until his father died. At the age of 23, Hirohito married his distant cousin, Princess Nagako Kuni. He did so against the advice of his advisors, who considered her to be an unsuitable match for the future emperor. 2 years later, with the death of his father, his regency ended, and he became the emperor. Hirohito inherited the throne on December 25, 1926. The 25-year-old was now the 124th Emperor of Japan. This automatically made him the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, able to give orders directly without consulting the cabinet. He also became the chief priest of the Shinto religion. Guiding him in his new political life, Hirohito was attended to by a 7-member palace entourage of men much older than himself. These gathered, filtered, and disseminated political information to the emperor. Hirohito quickly established a vast network of informants who relayed information to him on the going-ons in every corner of government. He even had a spy regularly reporting to him on the political activities of his brother, Prince Chichibu. The new emperor was keen to stamp his footprint on the political landscape. His first act was to announce a public holiday in remembrance of his grandfather. Then, in an effort to show solidarity with the peasantry during a time of agricultural hardship, he received rice plants from all over the empire and staged a ritualistic rice planting event within the palace grounds. Throughout the year 1928, enthronement ceremonies and rituals were carried out in honor of the emperor. The celebrations climaxed in November and December when hundreds of thousands of people participated in banquets and award ceremonies. In the emperor's name, millions of yen were given to the needy and thousands of prison sentences were commuted. The reign of Hirohito was designated as Showa, which means enlightened peace. From the moment of his ascension, the emperor was no longer to be referred to by his given name, but rather by the title His Majesty the Emperor. Hirohito came to power during a time of economic hardship. The crisis had led to the rise of political power of the military, who now had veto power over his cabinet. Incidents of political violence were not uncommon. In 1932, the Prime Minister Inoue Hideyoshi was assassinated, and there was an attempt on Hirohito's own life in 1932. This incident led to a dramatic curtailing of the emperor's availability to the public. As emperor, Hirohito followed a disciplined routine. He rose at 6 sharp every morning to prepare for an English breakfast at 7. Throughout the morning, he would receive visitors, enjoy a light lunch at midday, and then spend the afternoon poring over and signing documents. Hirohito's marriage to Nagako, it was a happy one, with their only source of anxiety being the failure to produce an heir. His advisors urged him to take a concubine, but he resisted this advice. The couple bore 3 daughters before the heir to the throne, Akihito, arrived in 1933. The couple went on to have a total of 7 children. Japan had enjoyed a level of unprecedented growth and prosperity during the 1920s. In essence, the country existed as a democracy during this period, which lessened the influence of the military. This came to an end with the onset of the Depression, during which time the strong measures advocated by the military leaders began to gain ascendancy. The unification of neighboring China also fed into the call for a strong militaristic hand. In 1931, the military moved against civilian leaders, but first they devised a plan to go to war with Manchuria by blowing up a portion of the South Manchurian Railway and blaming it on the Chinese. This gave the pretext for an invasion of Manchuria. The emperor, not to mention the government, was completely in the dark about any of these goings-on. This set the scene for the 1930s. This was a period during which the military pretty much acted in an arbitrary fashion. When the army began a full-scale invasion of China, Hirohito ordered that they stop. However, the cabinet managed to persuade the emperor to acquiesce and allow this invasion to proceed. Hirohito felt powerless to rein in the army, ever fearful that doing so would result in his assassination. In 1932, he gave the go-ahead for the bombing of Shanghai. The assault was also approved by the Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek, who saw it as an opportunity to put down a rebel group who were based in Shanghai. The bombing and subsequent invasion led to tremendous loss of life, unleashing worldwide condemnation. Hirohito was worried that the Americans might respond militarily and told the army to withdraw. Again, they ignored the commands of their emperor. The Japanese went on to completely subjugate Shanghai. By now, Manchuria was completely occupied and had become a Japanese state. Many Chinese were simply put to death by the occupying force. Once again, this brought public condemnation, with the League of Nations condemning the Japanese. In response, Japan resigned from the League, despite the emperor's desire to remain within it. Unable to stop the withdrawal, he insisted that his foreign minister stress that Japan was determined to work to achieve world peace. Throughout the 1930s, spurred by the flexing of its military muscle, a sense of nationalism grew in Japan that saw a reverence for the samurai traditions of old. All of this fed into the worship of the emperor, which was especially strong among the rank and file of the armed forces. These soldiers viewed Hirohito as a god and pledged their lives to serve him. In 1934, Japan began to enlarge its navy, in direct violation of the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922, which had restricted its size to 3/5 that of the United States and Great Britain. Yet again, Hirohito was against the move, but was not strong enough to stand up to the military. The flexing of military muscle came to a head in February of 1936, when there occurred an uprising led by army officers. Finally, Hirohito acted decisively. He ordered the immediate suppression of the revolt, along with the execution of its instigators. Hirohito was powerless, however, to stop the growing power of the military. By 1937, the situation with China had developed into all-out war. Hirohito had agreed to a build-up of forces in occupied China in order to stem the tide of communism, but he soon realized that hostilities were escalating uncontrollably, and he insisted that the army pull back. However, the military brass, they were not listening. A full-scale attack was made on the Chinese capital of Nanking. In the wake of the subjugation of Nanking, the Japanese army unleashed an orgy of rape and murder that shocked the world. Known as the Rape of Nanking, it resulted in the death of as many as 200,000 Chinese men, women, and children. Worldwide condemnation for the atrocities of Nanking were heaped upon Japan. Still, the armed forces forged on in their attempt to conquer China. However, the country was simply too large, with the result that the Japanese military was tied up in a hopeless mission on foreign soil for the next 4 years. By the outbreak of the Second World War, the combination of nationalism, emperor worship, and military control had forged Japan into a nation that was ready and eager to enter hostilities with other nations. After all, going to war was seen as doing the will of the emperor. The reality was that Hirohito was opposed to the idea of his country going to war. He was a pacifist at heart and was cautious by nature. But he was simply too weak-willed to control the reins of a military that was chomping at the bit to exert its control throughout the Far East. In September 1940, Japan entered into a three-way alliance with Germany and Italy. This gave the military leaders the confidence to extend its conquests in the Far East. The first victim would be the French colony of Indochina. With the French already having been beaten by Germany, it was easy pickings. The emperor, however, was opposed to the move on principle, considering it to be like acting as a thief in a fire. In 1941, Japan signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. This gave the military the confidence to extend its occupation into southern Indochina. In response, the United States imposed tough sanctions on the Japanese. They also put an embargo on all oil exports to Japan. This move forced Japan's hand, with the result that the decision was made to go to war with the United States. As usual, the emperor felt powerless to stop this military juggernaut. With the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, war was declared between the United States and Japan. Hirohito, though not opposing the planned attack, had always intended that Japan would declare war before striking. He considered the surprise attack on Hawaii as dirty tactics and was extremely upset with the military for the manner in which this attack was carried out. With the much longed-for war now upon them, all of Japan put their shoulder to the wheel in support of victory. Ironically, the emperor, who had never been an advocate of the war, was looked to as the champion of the Japanese war effort. During the first few months of 1942, Japan won victory after victory, Malaya, Singapore, Bataan, but then a heavy blow was inflicted when an American bombing raid was unleashed upon a number of key Japanese cities. The Battle of Midway was the first military defeat, and they simply never recovered. By the end of 1944, Japan's last hopes rested with the kamikaze pilots who vowed to die for their emperor by crashing their planes into American aircraft carriers. But this was simply too little, too late. Hirohito was by now eager to see an end to hostilities. For the first time, he involved himself in the planning of a battle that, if won, would force the Americans to propose a peace settlement. The resulting Battle of Okinawa saw some of the fiercest fighting of the entire war. However, the emperor's plan, it backfired. The American casualties were so high that they despaired that the Japanese would ever surrender. With American bombs decimating his key cities, Hirohito was ready to put an end to the carnage. But once again, he was overridden by his military commanders, who vowed to never surrender. On August the 6th and 9th, 1945, the Americans dropped atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Despite the terrible loss of life that resulted, half of the Prime Minister's cabinet were opposed to a surrender. The deadlock, it was broken by the emperor. On August the 15th, the people of Japan heard the voice of their emperor for the first time. He told them that Japan was surrendering to the Allies. In stating his reasons for the surrender, he said, with reference to the atomic bomb, that a continuation of the struggle would lead to the total extinction of human civilization. The formal surrender took place on September the 2nd on board the USS Missouri. Hirohito did not have to suffer the indignity of attending. Japan was now an occupied country under the management of General Douglas MacArthur. The emperor expressed a desire to abdicate, but he was persuaded to remain in place by MacArthur. Keeping him on the throne would help to provide some semblance of normality as Japan emerged from the ashes of war. The Allies drew up a list of 28 top wartime leaders who were culpable of committing crimes against humanity during the war, and they put them on trial. Hirohito, though, he was not among them. Still, many pointed the finger at the emperor. Surely, if he was a god, he could have stopped the atrocities. With mounting pressure, Hirohito spoke to his people for a second time over the radio on New Year's Day 1946. This time, what he had to say was even more shocking than his announcement of the surrender. He was not a god, he told the nation, but just an imperfect human being, just like them. In the wake of this bombshell announcement, his title was officially changed from imperial sovereign to constitutional monarch. Throughout the next few years, Hirohito made many public appearances. He toured bombed-out cities and inspected new factories. Now he dressed in a suit and tie, looking more like a prime minister than an emperor. Hirohito's image was now reshaped into the symbol of the well-to-do Japanese middle-class success story. He was what the ordinary Japanese man could strive to be if he worked hard enough. Free of his imperial duties, the former emperor now had time to indulge his passion for biology. In the ensuing decades, Hirohito faded into the background of Japanese significance. He was increasingly seen as a symbol of the old Japan. The new Japan, it was focused on industrialization, consumerism, and a strong work ethic. His value was now as a public relations figure who was occasionally wheeled out and sent around the world on goodwill tours. Still, the spectre of the passing of the emperor in the mid-1980s saw an outpouring of grief and profound respect among all classes and all ages in Japan. But also there was the question of war responsibility. The consensus was and remains that Hirohito bore a measure of moral responsibility for the atrocities that were committed in China and through the Far East in the 1930s and 40s. The end, it ultimately came on January 7th, 1989, the result of duodenal cancer. The funeral was attended by representatives of 163 nations. Many had mixed feelings about being there because of the war responsibility question. Great Britain's Prince Philip later said that he overcame his conscience by not bowing before the emperor's casket, simply nodding his head slightly. So I really hope you enjoyed that episode of Biographics. If you did, there's a couple of things you could do right now. One is hit that like button below. Also, if you want more stuff like this, we put out brand new videos every Monday and every Thursday, so hit that subscribe button below. And subscribe button doesn't do what it used to on YouTube. If you actually want to get a notification about these videos, please do hit that bell button next to the subscribe button, and that'll send you a notification every time, every Monday and Thursday when we put out a new video. Also, if you want to watch something else right now, stuff from the archive, over there on the right. And as always, thank you for watching.